Hello, I am Eddie O'Sullivan, and this is This Week in the Italian Campaign. In This Week in the Italian Campaign, the 8th Army advance across the River Sangro in November 1943 with my guest, Richard O'Sullivan. But first, a roundup of events in Italy this week, 80 years ago. On the 19th of November, New Zealand's Armoured Brigade joined the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Punjab Regiment in an attack on Parano, overlooking the Sangro. 6 of its tanks were knocked out in the first battle in Italy for the New Zealand Division, which had started landing on the mainland on the 22nd of October. On the 22nd of November, the Sextant Conference opened in Cairo. It was attended by UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill, US President Roosevelt, and Chinese President Chiang Kai-shek. The conference mainly dealt with plans for Asia after the defeat of Japan. But it heard a report from General Eisenhower that an amphibious operation to outflank the Gustav Line was unlikely before mid-December. Landing craft needed for Northwest Europe would have to be kept in the Mediterranean. Maximum pressure was to be maintained in Italy to help create conditions required for Operation Overlord and for the Allied forces, including the French Army and Air Force, to land in southern France. On the 8th of November, Eisenhower had ordered Allied forces to advance rapidly to capture Rome and push the Germans beyond an east-west line from Pisa to Rimini. 15th Army Group Commander General Alexander authorized a double punch against the Bernhardt and Winter lines. The first was to be landed by the 8th Army against the German defences on a ridge overlooking the Sangro, and this was to be followed by the 5th Army attacking in the west and an amphibious landing. 8th Army Commander General Montgomery devised a plan for its main blow to be delivered by 5 Corps, commanded by General Charles Orfrey. This would involve Britain's 78th Division, the 8th Indian Division, the 4th Armoured Brigade, and the 1st Canadian Armoured Brigade advancing on a narrow front. They were to be supported by 690 artillery pieces and around 200 Sherman tanks. The attack was to begin on the 20th of November. The main attack was preceded by a deception exercise by 13 Corps commanded by Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey. That suggested the main attack was actually to take place in the High Apennines. This involved threatening Castel di Sangro and Alfedena on the upper reaches of the River Sangro, both commanded roads north to Avezzano. Lieutenant General Sir Bernard Freyberg's 2nd New Zealand Division, which had started landing in Italy in October, replaced the 8th Indian Division on the 5th Corps' left on the morning of the 14th of November. False material dumps were built and troops moved towards the mountains by day and the coast by night. The arrival of the New Zealanders was masked by patrolling by the Indian Division. Wireless messages were transmitted in Urdu. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy and the 1st Airborne Division made fake preparations to suggest there were plans to repeat the Termini landing in the area of Pescara. A key role in the deception was played by the 1st Canadian Division led by the 3rd Armoured Brigade. On the 16th of November, it advanced towards Caravigli as a base for operations. Every bridge had been blown and roads were blocked by craters and broken culverts. The advance was delayed by repairs and heavy rain. The plan called for the lateral road between Castel di Sangro to Alfedena to be cut, to suggest that 13 Corps was attempting to link up with the American 5th Army on the left. The Canadians were ordered to gain control of the Upper Sangro from Castel di Sangro to Ataleta and prepare to attack across the Sangro on the 21st of November. This would allow a brigade group to be sent up Highway 17. To give the impression that the whole division was moving forward from Campobasso, the Canadians opened a tactical divisional headquarters in the Carovigli area. This sector of the German defences was the responsibility of Heydrich's 1st Parachute Division. The 3rd Canadian Brigade's first contact with the opposition came on the afternoon of the 17th of November. Next day, the Royal 22nd Regiment set up headquarters in Vasto Girardi and sent B Company to San Pietro in the evening of the 18th of November. The 3rd Brigade's war diary noted San Pietro flattened, also burning. Ataleta observed burning. Capricotta also burning. In all, 10 villages were destroyed by the Germans as they withdrew. On the night of the 20th of November, the West Nova Scotia Regiment entered Castel di Sangro. It was discovered there was a permanent bridge and a pontoon bridge still intact. An attempt to capture the permanent crossing was thwarted when it was destroyed around midnight. The pontoon bridge below Ataleta was also soon removed. On the morning of the 22nd of November, the road leading to Capricotta had been repaired to allow the passage of jeeps and guns. Except for the pinnacle at Castel di Sangro, the 3rd Brigade controlled the whole of the east bank of the Sangro by the end of the day. On the 22nd of November, the Canadians tried and failed to take the pinnacle. Alfadena was cleared that morning by the British 5th Division. On the same day, the 5th Division started its deception manoeuvres. Air bombardment and heavy artillery fire supported the feint attack. On the 24th of November, artillery pounded German positions north of the Sangro. Under cover of a day-long bombardment, the West Nova Scotia Regiment captured the Castel di Sangro pinnacle. On the 25th of November, the Canadian Division received warning to move to the Adriatic coast, where the main 8th Army attack against the Winter Line was to begin 2 days later. The diversion operation was continued by the British 5th Division, but the Germans failed to take the bait. On the 18th of November, acting 10th Army Commander General Lemelson signalled Kesselring. The concentration of the 8th Army on the Adriatic front leads 10th Army to expect an early attack on our left wing. On the 25th of November, Lemelson accurately assessed Allied intentions. By means of a thrust towards Pescara, 8th Army are trying to force 10th Army to commit its reserves and to take troops from the right wing, thereby facilitating the main thrust towards Rome. By the 27th of November, preparations for the 8th Army's main drive up the Adriatic coast had been completed. Diversionary operations in the mountains came to an end. The Germans started withdrawing from the Barbara Line on the 3rd of November, and on the 9th took up positions on a ridge line overlooking the Sangro River 30 kilometers to the north. The 78th Division advanced and dominated both sides of the river with almost no German interference. Montgomery had his first planning meeting for the main attack across the Sangro on the 14th of November. It was scheduled for the night of the 19th, but this depended upon 2 dry days immediately before. On the 15th of November, the Sangro burst its banks due to heavy rainfall, which continued the next day. This stopped 8th Army patrols across the river. The attack was postponed. The Germans re-entered the Sangro Valley to lay minefields and strengthen defences. The flooding obliged Montgomery to postpone the attack until bridges were completed over the Sangro, which was swollen to more than a kilometre. On the night of the 18th of November, 36th Brigade forded the river to establish a bridgehead where they could be built. 2 bridges across the Sangro were erected on the night of the 21st of November. By the end of the 22nd, 5 battalions were on the north bank. On the extreme west of the front, the 19th Brigade of the 8th Indian Division waded across the river before dawn on the 23rd of November to establish a bridgehead west of Parano for the New Zealand Division to use. And on the night of the 24th of November, the 21st Infantry Brigade of the Indian Division crossed the Sangro to relieve a battalion of the 78th Division in a gully below Mozzagrogna. By dawn of the 26th of November, all of the division's 17th and 21st Brigades were across the river. The Royal Irish Fusiliers, known as the Fogs, were preparing to join the attack in the town of Torino in Sangro, 5 kilometres south of the front line. On the 22nd of November, Fogs Captain Franklin Rory Vale wrote a letter to his wife Olive in the UK. Just at the moment, I am suffering from what is known as desert sores. These wretched things apparently started in the desert and seem to follow the 8th Army. No one really knows what is the cause. Our medical officer thinks it is partly the perpetual tin food and lack of variety, the sweat and dirt that gets into any cut, and they develop, if one is feeling at all, run down in health. They're much the same as normal sores, except they are painful and spread rather considerably. I have one on my left hand, a very large one on my right wrist, another on my right elbow, and a very painful one on my leg. The leg one is halfway between the knee and the foot and makes it quite painful to walk. As you have no doubt been reading in the papers, the weather is bad out here, and we are continually surrounded by seas of mud. We have been having rather a wet and muddy time of it recently, plenty of rain and very little shelter. Stumbling around in the mud at night is far from pleasant. How I miss John Glennie's cheerful smile and Irish jokes. When everyone else was grumbling, he would say, "You know, Frank, we are not having it nearly as hard as we might. Hope you're keeping well, precious, and are comfortable. All my love and kisses, dearest little wife. A great big kiss for Valerie. Lawrence."
Well, that's the story of the campaign in the Adriatic sector and the preparations for the big attack across the Sangro against the German line north of Sangro in November 1943. To discuss this and other matters, I'm now joined by my live guest, Richard O'Sullivan in Windsor. Hello, Richard.
Good afternoon.
Good. Well, most episodes at this point I discuss a book, and one that I've read and one I can recommend. I think you've got one you want to talk about. Tell us about it. Tell us about the topic, the author, and anything else that you might like to share.
Just a reminder read for me, actually, because this book was written about 10 years ago by a friend, Bryn Evans, who lives in Australia, and it covers the escapades of the East Surrey Regiment. 2 battalions were in Italy and in North Africa. The 1st Battalion East Surrey Regiment, who we know well from this campaign that we're speaking about, where they were in the 78th Division, 11 brigades that have been in North Africa, over into Sicily, and then up the Adriatic coast. And they're part of this narrative that we're talking about at this moment. The other battalion it covers, the 1st 6th, the territorial outfit, which was in the 4th Infantry Division. And they came to Italy. They were in North Africa for a short while, and then they came to Italy and fought at Cassino in the final battle, crossing of the Gari River in May 1944. So the book actually, in a sense, doesn't add anything massively new about the overall campaign, but actually delves in, as we do, into London Irish Rifles, the Irish Brigade, into a battalion level narrative. And there's quite a few good instances of personal narrative. And Bryn later wrote a book about the Desert Air Force. And so I've been just reminding myself of it in the last few days.
So the East Surreys, their headquarters was in Kingston. So they were a London regiment in many respects.
Yeah, I guess in the traditional history of London, I mean, as Greater London moved out, so East Surreys were in what would have been called Surrey, but now Greater London. So yes, Kingston was their depot from after the reforms of the 19th century and the amalgamation of various foots, that they became depoted at Kingston.
Okay, well, this week, 80 years ago, almost exactly, I think on the 17th of November, it was Bernard Montgomery's birthday. Tell us a bit about Bernard Montgomery at this stage.
Well, it was his 56th birthday. He was born in 1887, and I walked past his home where he was born. Obviously, his family from Donegal, County Donegal in Ireland, but actually he was born because of his connection, his father's connection with the church in he was the parish priest at Kennington. So his blue plaque, where he was born, was this right 50 yards from the front gate of the Oval cricket ground in Kennington. So he's 56. He was born in 1887. So his 136th anniversary on Friday. So as we know, in retrospect, he was at the end of his long journey with the 8th Army from North Africa to ultimately the Moro River. But I don't think he knew formally at this stage of November 43 that he was going to move back to Western Europe and later command overlord. So he was here in Italy still, and there was quite a notable few occasions where he was seen in the front line or near the front line. One specific occasion, a week later, around the 25th or 26th of November, where he actually came up. He would do this regularly, it seemed, go to the front line. People thought it meant that something was in the wind. I mean, the troops obviously knew something was going to happen soon. They'd been at Sangro for a couple of weeks, but he actually drove up, and my father and his friends in the London Irish Rifles were based near Castle Bordino, south of the Sangro. Montgomery came up, as always. He gathered round, take your carbines off or your berets off, and he said, where are all the best troops from? The answers would regularly from various places, quite typically somewhere in Ireland or in Ireland. That would be the right answer as far as he concerned. And he handed my father 5,000 Gallagher's blue label cigarettes. Montgomery, as we know, is well known as historically as a non-smoker. We've heard occasions where he's been with Churchill in a car, not really being discomforted by the smoke of Churchill's cigar. But anyway, on this occasion, he passed over the 5,000 cigarettes to my father. My father used to dine out, not formally, but in a narrative sense, and talk about, the last time I met Monty, he gave me 5,000 cigarettes. And it was the last time that my father met Monty.
One of the officers of the London Irish Rifles at this point, 2 London Irish Rifles, was Desmond Woods. But he had some kind of encounter, didn't he, previously with Montgomery? What do we know about that?
Well, Desmond, we spoke about him briefly recently. He came to the London Irish Rifles from the lead regiment, the Royal Ulster Rifles. So he joined the London Irish Rifles 2nd Battalion in October 1943 at Termley. Soon took over command of H Company. But previously, he had been in Palestine before the war, missed the Royal Ulster Rifles adventures, if we can call it, the retreat to Dunkirk in 1940. But because he was a young up-and-coming officer and received the MC, he was on what you might perceive as a decent career path. So he became ADC to Monty, one of 2 at the time, in late 1941. So there is a very vivid and amusing commentary of Desmond's time as ADC with Monty in 1941, during the training period in southern England, and occasionally he would go out on a motorbike. Desmond, there's one of 2 elements that are very moving, I feel, because Desmond obviously got on very well with Monty, and it seemed just as Desmond was moving to his next position, which he became a training major, and then eventually 2nd London Irish Rifles. He said he was in the room with Monty, and Monty sort of said, Desmond, come over, and said to Desmond, it's in the audio, the oral testimony that Desmond Woods gave. He said that Monty had said to him, this is all I have, and looked round this bare room in southern England and said it was after his wife had died. And it seemed to be, the way Desmond described it, he felt quite sad for Monty. And I'm not trying to be psychoanalysis expert on this, but there was quite an interesting moment of that oral testimony. And he said, this is all I have, Desmond. And he seemed, as in Desmond's words, depressed, I suppose, the word he described.
Yeah, well, he wasn't famously high-spirited, although he didn't discourage people enjoying themselves. I mean, he certainly was handing out fags, and he was aware that troops needed a drink before they went into battle, and they needed proper R&R afterwards. So he was still a populist in that way, although he was a bit strange as a personality. Who knows what the reason is for that? Now, we mentioned in this account that the New Zealanders are now coming into line, and they're about to get involved. They had their first serious battle on the 19th of November in Pirano, and they crossed into the bridgehead on the left, and they were to take part in the attack. The New Zealanders at this point, a very seasoned, battle-hardened group from the Desert Campaign. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And Freiburg, you mentioned in the narrative, who was leading them, and later famously took on core leadership for a short period in the Casino period. So they were coming in. The front, the 8th Indian Division, who had been on that left side, quite on the flank, were moving gradually to the right, and would take part in Operation Encroach, the battle period, or the battle breakthrough in this area across the Sangro in late November and into early December. So it was the consequent move across of the front. New Zealand's were taking that place on the left and moving further north. The 8th Indian were moving across, and the Irish Brigade, the 78th Division, and the 11th and 36th Brigade, as we know, had sat in the bridgehead for various occasions during this period in November and getting cut off because of the floods of coming down from the mountains. And the Irish Brigade were awaiting their time of attack.
So at this point, the 8th Army was getting to be quite an international organisation. We've got the Indian Division, which is not entirely Indian soldiers, but mainly Indian. We have the New Zealanders involved, and the French are about to start landing in Italy. And so the international dimension of the army in Italy is becoming more and more marked. The Poles have arrived, and this is all a manifestation partly of the shortage of labour for the Italian campaign and the need to ship men back who Montgomery and others believed would be effective in Northwest Europe, and they were replaced by an increasingly international body of people. We mentioned, again, every week we're doing passages from the diaries, the letters of Laurie Franklin Vale to his wife, really extraordinarily rich source of information and feelings. He's on the roll of honour, isn't he, at the Melbourne Cricket ground in Australia? That's correct, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. I visited, when I met his daughter several years ago, 7 years ago, in fact, 2016, I had the opportunity to go to the MCG, Melbourne Cricket Ground. I suppose the equivalent of Lord's, if you're from that area, probably say it's well above Lord's, but the ground itself is very impressive. In its basement is a fantastic museum of multi-sports. So Australian rules as well as cricket obviously is Bradman's hat. But there's an area which you just on the far side, there's a roll of honour of over 200, I think, or well over 100 anyway, men who were killed in action in the Second World War, I think, and maybe first as well. But Laurie Franklin Vale is named. So he was clearly a member of Melbourne Cricket Club at some point in the 1930s. You know, we know he was born in 1908, so he had opportunity before he went to England in the 1930s to be active in social ways as well as play cricket in some form. I don't know exactly how he played for the Melbourne Cricket Club, but he's named on the Roll of Honour on the wall. And obviously he's a well-known character in our narrative and many other narratives about the 78th Division and the 8th Army in Italy.
And of course, he's one of the few Australians in the Italian campaign, because of course the Australians initially were in North Africa and then they withdrawn and didn't serve in Europe, at least not in the army. I mean, you had them in the
Air Force. And just to interject, of course, I've just finished watching the World Cup final cricket, and I think Australia might have won it.
Yes. All right, well, don't rub it in. Anyway, Richard, look, thanks very much for another very interesting set of insights about the state of the campaign. We'll be back next week to talk about the actual attack against the German line above the Sangro, and this is a very, very powerful narrative, and so I'm looking forward to discussing that with you next week. So thanks very much, Richard.
Thank you.
So that's it basically for this week. We'll be back next week. And so from everybody here at This Week in the Italian Campaign, it's for now, goodbye, good luck, and may God bless you all.